The relentless demands, can you do this and add this and so on? All of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just the sheer volume of it, the pressure of it seems to me to be adding enormous stress.
There's a lot of short-termism, a lot of band-aids, a lot of short random tactics to try and conquer these larger and deeper seated issues. It's things like impact blindness. We've either grown so fast or things have changed and we're losing track of the initiatives that we have in progress. Sticky recognition is my little phrase, and I define it as a way to show a person or a team the evidence of their impact. So we know when we have a keen awareness of the impact and the significance that we're having in our world of work, it just unlocks what I call a whole host of psychological fuel. We just show up and interact with our day-to-day in a much different way. But I think, again, the unmanageable workload and the busyness start to pull us away from some of these great practices, and there's newer research also suggesting that teams that do that consistently actually show.
There is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. I think workloads are out of control, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that. The number of projects, the inability to stop anything, the inability to get anything finished, it seems, and then the relentless demands. Can you do this and add this and so on? All of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And all of that, just the sheer volume of it, the pressure of it, seems to me to be adding enormous stress. To you as a leader, meaning how am I going to get all my team to do on this, or how am I protecting my team, as well as stress for the team on the demands in the team. So what we want to focus on today is how do you think about this workload sustainability challenge? This is not about work less or quiet quit or any other favorite phrase, and this is not about work harder, because I don't think there is any harder to do. So we want to talk about what you can do for your team and for yourself, and how do you build not just your personal resistance, but team resilience. How do you keep your team motivated? And as always, we're going to do some very practical tactics. My guest today is Paula Davis. She's the founder CEO of Stress and Resilient Institute. 15 years, she's been a trusted advisor to leaders in organizations of all sizes, recognized as an expert in workplace stress, burnout prevention, and building resilience. Her first book was Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience. And her book today that we're talking about is Leading Well, 5 Mindsets to Engage, Retain, and Inspire Your Team. And I should say, just by interest, Paula had a law practice for 7 years, master's degree, then after that in applied positive psychology from University of Pennsylvania, and then has gone on to do this kind of work as opposed to her legal advisory work. So Paula, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Wanda. It's a joy, and I can't wait to dig into this issue with these topics.
I can't wait either, especially coming from the point of view of burnout. Mm-hmm. All right, why? I have to know why. Why does this topic matter to you? Why did you decide to write this book?
Oh, that's such a great question. So much of the thread of my work over the last 15 years since I transitioned out of my law practice has been very stress focused and burnout prevention, burnout focused. And so I wrote my first book, Beating Burnout at Work. It was published in 2021. If we take ourselves back to that moment in time, we were all in the middle of the pandemic, and it was really the topic that everyone was talking about at that point in time. And it gave me really a fantastic opportunity, a window, a door to walk in and talk to and work with a lot of leaders and a lot of teams around their frustrations and stress. And I really got to see front and center the issues that were impacting teams and leaders in a really big way. And I realized as I started to dig into that, there were common themes, which is what kind of formed the basis of the mindsets that I write about in the new book. But there really also wasn't a language or a starting point or a common way for leaders to say, like, I see all these issues, but I don't know what to do about it. I don't know where to start. And just generally, I've been seeing too in my work, we keep focusing on one-off programs and one-off tactics, oftentimes to fix these systemic issues. And I realized that we needed to really dig into that intersection as well. So that was all that gave rise to why I wanted to write the book.
So fundamentally, you see what I see, which is people are struggling. And
People are struggling.
And I get so frustrated because I think as a profession, we keep describing it, we keep labeling it. Oh, that's burnout. Oh, that is pressure. Oh, that is, you just need to motivate. And we say motivate or build resilience. But none of those give you any real tangible things to do to actually alleviate the problem.
No, and certainly nothing long term, right? There's a lot of like short termism, a lot of band-aids, a lot of short type of like random tactics to try and conquer these larger and deeper seated issues and goals for companies.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep hoping that as much as various people like to complain about the younger generation, that the younger generation is going to force us to deal with some of these problems rather than just keep pushing them under the carpet and hoping next year is better. All right. So I want to talk about this workload problem. So I hear it everywhere. I mean, I don't talk to a single person in any continent in the world, any company in the world who isn't overwhelmed with this ever expanding list of to-dos. And it's not just the to-dos, it's the double down and double check and recheck and risk assessment and somebody sign off and re-sign off. And it feels like we're over and over and over spinning our wheels and can't get anywhere. What's your perspective on what's really driving this problem?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm seeing the same thing that you are. And I mean, this was a clear marker and continues to be a clear marker with the teams and leaders with whom I've worked over the past handful of years and obviously now, is the workload unsustainability, the unsustainable workload piece. And so I really knew I had to dig into this for my book, and I really didn't want to because this is a very complicated issue. And so I tried my best to kind of wade into that. And there's really a whole host of things, and not all of these pieces may be impacting your organization or your teams or your leaders, but some of them certainly are. And I think it's the starting point for leaders to realize, all right, we've got to figure out kind of the underneath layers of what's causing this if we're going to do anything about it. And it's things like impact blindness, right? We've either grown so fast or things have changed and we're losing track of the initiatives that we have in progress. It's limited line of sight. As a leader for my team, I know what my team is focused on and working on, but I'm not really focused on other teams in my organization. And so I may underappreciate everything that everybody else has on their plate. Band-aid initiatives, a little bit of what we were talking about already, right? We've got so many little things open, but we're not giving the resources and the support to meaningfully help teams really be able to fix what is turning into, or what really always was, a really complicated issue. And so it just the project or the pieces stay open. And then I think also too, like just failing to rebalance when people leave, right? There's a lot of shift and growth and layoffs here and there, depending on industry. And you keep the workload at the same level, but you don't have nearly the same number of people to help. And so that's an issue. So it's a combination of different things.
I had two things I want to call out and get your reaction to. Mm-hmm. One is, a new leader comes in, they're looking to make their mark. And every leader coming in wants to make some change. And that's what your job is largely, is to change things, hopefully for the better, not for the worse. But that means you have to start something. And it gets added. What we don't do is kill anything.
Yes.
And then we layer mess on top of mess. So that's my first comment. Second thing is, I think we have layered process on top of process, on top of process, on top of process. When I feel like we need to drag back the work of the 1990s with process reengineering and say, can't we simplify the processes? And I know companies are saying that everywhere, but it's making zero impact.
Without question. And I mean, even just these two comments that you set forth illustrate the complexities that we're dealing with, right? Because, and to your first point, leaders wanting to make their mark, and they're coming in and they have their agenda, or they have their ideas, or they have their way that they want to see the culture or their teams shift or the work, change or what have you. And you're right that it is oftentimes, I think, maybe very intentional for them to want to add their agenda or piece to it, but unintentionally not being as intentional with what do we shed, or what does this mean for what I've sort of walked into, what the output or the project basis or initiatives look like as I came into. as I came into this role. And I just don't think there's a lot of questions around that. And I think oftentimes too, leaders are tasked to get the job done, to make the change, to make their numbers, to advance, the goal. And that becomes the central focus. And we just start progressing in that direction without the intentionality of that other piece.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That's a big issue.
I was just talking to a leader this weekend, a young leader this weekend, who's got, a global team and people scattered all over, and everybody has got their piece of a big initiative that they're trying to drive forward. All I will give the leader credit for, seemingly well organized. But you have one person in that mix who just says, okay, given the timeline and the pressure, I'm going to do everything I can just to make it happen. And often then ends up with solutions that are not ideal, expedient for the timeline, but end up with back-ended problems. And it's just that kind of craziness that's going on right, left, and center. Okay, so now the question is, so what do we do about it?
Right.
And I guess this is the point to say, what are the 5 mindsets?
Sure. So there's a collection of practices that become really important for leaders to think about. And the one piece that I always like to emphasize is you don't have to do all of these pieces, but think about where your best entry point is as we kind of talk about and explain some of this. And so the first mindset is oftentimes where I will tell leaders to start, simply because it's such low-hanging fruit. It's low-hanging engagement, well-being, resilience, motivation fruit. And that is with prioritizing what I call sticky recognition and mattering. So sticky recognition is my little phrase, and I define it as a way to show a person or a team the evidence of their impact. So we know when we have a keen awareness of the impact and the significance that we're having in our world of work, it just unlocks what I call a whole host of psychological fuel. We just show up and interact with our day-to-day in a much different way. And the other piece that I ended up discovering as I was digging into this concept of sticky recognition is that it unlocks something called mattering. And mattering is our combination of wanting to know that we're achieving and working on things that are important to us, but that we're also being noticed for those things as well. And that doesn't mean we have to have 17 cheerleaders and a band show up at work every day, but that those little moments of hallway conversations, or before the Zoom meeting starts, you ask like, hey, how's the family doing? I remember so-and-so had a softball game last week. How did that go? Those tiny moments of just noticing, affirming, and letting people know how you rely on them do an extraordinary amount of great stuff for us in terms of those outcomes that we want to see. And so, most of it is very simple, quick types of things that don't take much time at all. And so prioritizing that first. The next mindset is to amplify what I call ABC needs. So that is another very powerful combination of needs that we all have in our world of work. We need the A is a measure of autonomy. I want the ability to choose my own adventure a little bit in the confines of my work. I need a sense of belonging or connection and community. And then I need a sense of challenge. I need a sense of growth. I need a sense of knowing that I'm advancing toward things that are important to me, and that you as my leader or understand what that is and are helping me see that or get there. And then we come to the workload sustainability mindset, which is, how do we start to get our arms around that? And I realized after all of my digging and sleuthing and research that it really comes down to 2 big pieces. It is, how do we create better teaming practices? And how do we allow for enough recovery, enough of that, pause piece? And we're not doing either one of those things well. And then
coming back to that one. Okay. Yes.
Yes. And then creating a sense of what I call systemic resilience. So we talk a lot about the concept of resilience, but thinking about it not just from an individual perspective, but also from a team perspective. How do we build resilient teams? And then how do we build resilient organizations? So that's a lot to unpack in and of itself. So my chapter just focuses on the team side and the organization side. And then the last mindset is really about values, alignment, and meaning. What can leaders do to amplify or create a sense of meaningful work for folks? And to your point, about the different generations, I'm part of Gen X, and I think that I know that having a sense of values alignment and meaningful work was really important to me. I think our generation just sort of fell in line, though, as we sort of ascended through our work. But it's a critical must-have for particularly younger millennials and those in Gen Z, and I suspect those that will follow behind Gen Z. So that sense of meaning in our work is really important as well. So you can see over the arc of the 5 mindsets, what we're really talking about are again, what I call good teaming practices and good human strategies. It's that combination or blend that we really need to start thinking about to help ourselves really start to tackle, I think, the root causes of the stress and the disengagement.
Okay, so just to get the 5, sticky recognition and mattering. I love that. And if there's one thing anybody takes away from this podcast or any other one I've talked about, letting people know that they matter as a human being, that you noticed something about them as a person, not about their output, but as a person, is just, and positively, not just critically, is like essential. So sticky recognition and mattering. 2, ABC needs. You're looking for a quick course on motivation, autonomy, belonging, challenge. That's it. Straightforward. Make sure everybody on your team has some degree of each of those. C, workload sustainability, which is about teaming practices and about recovery, coming back to that one. 4 is about building resilience, teams, and organizations. And 5 is about values, alignment, and meaning. All right, 5 feels like the advanced work. Yeah. I want to dig on the team resilience. What I find fascinating about this book and about your approach is we talk about individuals being resilient, and we always give the values of we're going to be a resilient organization. Adaptable, versatile, we might use the word. Was another one I heard recently. Any rate, variations on the words, all the same thing. Explain this to me. First off, what do you mean by resilience? Let's start there.
Yeah, this is fantastic. And I love starting at this point because we all have heard the word resilience. We know the word, or we think we know the word resilience. I think it's one of the most misunderstood words in our world of work. And I think it's taken on almost a secondary and a wrong connotation where we start to get the perception that this is just a leader's way to make us do, more work, or to stick it out when we shouldn't, or to tolerate a toxic culture or practices that, shouldn't be going on at work. And that's not at all what resilience is. It's our capacity. So think about it that way. It's our capacity, and it's really a skill set to be developed. So it's a capacity for us as a team, individually, team, organization, to be able to deal with and navigate our challenges, obstacles, failures, stressors, setbacks, problems, challenges, whatever word you want to put in there, right? So how do we get through all of that? Or how do we meet the moment with all of those things that we're dealing with, the change, the uncertainty? And then the second part of the definition is that how are we growing from that experience? So we just went through the gauntlet. We just experienced this massive issue or small little challenge or problem, because it doesn't always have to be a big thing. And what did we learn from that? What are the lessons that we can take from that so we can apply them to future challenges going forward? So resilience is more than just bouncing back. It's also bouncing forward. How do we collectively together now then look at the next challenge differently and in a better way so that we can go through it perhaps quicker or at least more efficiently? And again, continuing to learn as we go through that.
Right. Years ago, the best practice from the best teams is that you would take time after completing a major thing. Mm-hmm. And you would pull back and you'd say, what do we do well that we want to do again? What do we want to change if we were doing it again? And what did we learn? And some of the best ones actually document that. Heaven forbid. Like this was an offsite for even 2 days with some of the major projects. That practice is gone, but that's exactly what you're describing here.
Yes, it's critical. And whether you call it a huddle, huddles are a common terminology in the healthcare profession, whether you call it debriefing, a lot of this practice comes from the military and their after action reviews, right? So after a mission or something, the soldiers get together and talk about exactly what you just mentioned. And so that started to take root in corporate practices as well. But I think, again, the unmanageable workload and the busyness start to pull us away from some of these great practices. And there's newer research also suggesting that when teams do that, utilize that approach. And it doesn't have to be long. I mean, you can have a 5-hour facilitated debrief if you want to, but if you have those sort of micro huddles more consistently, especially after smaller challenges, the research is showing that teams that do that consistently actually show less burnout, because people leave those conversations feeling really supported, and they leave with a better understanding of what their role was in the arc of whatever the challenge or issue or problem was, and they have a better understanding of how to move forward after that. And so they're really, really valuable tools, for teams to take advantage of.
Right. I'm going to stick with this one for just a minute because I want to belabor the point, because it's so easy sitting there as a manager who's overwhelmed in yourself, and then the team is overwhelmed, all of that you just move on to the next. All right. And I have for years watched the mood of team events change by doing a very simple exercise that says, let's look back over the 2 years and just acknowledge all that has happened over a 2 to 3 year time period. Some of it good, some of it not so good. No other direction than that. Just a massive exercise. Everybody put everything up, because in the day-to-day, you don't really stop to reflect what was good about the week. You just miss it, or what I want to remember next time. You think you will and you don't. And that reflection just has this incredible uplift for the team. And this is what you're talking about, is resilience. The ability to meet the moment, whatever is there, and to grow from that moment.
Yes. And I think it's the entire process as you talk about it, right? Like taking a step back and pausing and look at all that we've accomplished, or all that we've navigated, or all that's been thrown at us or come our way, whatever the time period is in the last 6 months, year, or what have you. And out of that, I really, really punctuate for leaders and teams in particular that it's so important to be thinking about the small wins and successes that you've had, and to try and get in a habit of not just like over those big arcs of time, but even if you can break it down, like in your monthly, meetings or what have you, or your weekly get-togethers, or however often or frequently you come together, to get in a habit of talking about progress, essentially. And it's like the 1% or 2% ways you're just getting a little bit closer to, or better at, or enabling what it is that you want to accomplish. Because, this is Teresa Amabile and her colleagues' work. When we know that we're making a keen sense of progress towards something, especially something that's hard, where we've had a challenge or issues or struggles or stress with it, that helps us fortify, like, all right, it's Monday morning. I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to tackle the day, or I'm going to go into the office. That progress piece is a huge motivator and push and fuel for our psychology. And so really paying attention to that. And as a leader, making space for people to talk about that very, very consistently. And I always say, lower the bar. It's like the 1%, 2% ways your team is doing something well, or progressing through a challenge. That's really, really a critical piece to talk about.
Right. This reminds me of Stephen Petro's book. More recently, we just did a podcast with him a few months ago. The joy you make. And the principle behind the joy you make is finding not just the things that I'm grateful for, because that sets a high bar. It's the little teeny things, what was interesting about today. Mm-hmm. And that works at an individual level, because it's now gotten me finally to do a diary. It's working months later, so I have to report positively on that one.
Good.
But secondly, it works for the team too. It's the same idea. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of it gets back to the workload sustainability piece as well. When we think about how can we prioritize our work day or our work week in a better way, that builds in some of this time, right? A little bit of reflection time for ourselves and for our teams.
Okay. All right. Now, we talked earlier so we were talking about practices with teams, but you also talked about practices of recovery. This feels like a piece of recovery. Are there other things that you would advocate for teams to do that are going to help with the recovery process?
Sure. Building that sense of connection and community. So again, I think kind of connecting that back to the B part of the ABC model as well. There's one of my favorite research studies talks about the power of letting teams eat together. together, eat lunch together. The source of the study, I think, looked at firefighters in particular. So, potentially a pretty different industry. But the power of letting people like actually just come together in community, but also where there's not a necessarily obvious or any business case or outcome associated with it. And so that could be, leader to individual, just having little check-ins with folks, checking in and see how people are doing, letting them, again, experience that sense of community and connection and coming together. Talking about those wins and successes, but then also I talk about this strategy in the book. It's not enough just to talk about it, but when somebody then does say something that's been good or a win or a success, and they're oftentimes phrased in very little moments, that we capitalize on that and how bad we are generally as humans, because we are wired to notice and seek out and remember negative stuff, that we don't catch those moments with enough frequency. And so capitalizing when people share those moments is also a really, really powerful connector and strategy for teams to recover and build that sense of resilience too.
Yeah. I think this is the hardest one. I mean, you're wired as a manager or as a leader to find the problems and fix the problems, zero in on where the problem is. So yes, okay, the success is great, fine, that's fantastic, wonderful. Next, where's the problem? Where's the problem? Where's the problem? Because that's where you get my sense of value. And you're saying don't just do that. Go ahead.
No, correct. And as leaders, I talk about this as well, where we oftentimes listen to fix or we listen to win. I talk about that with my lawyer groups a lot. We don't oftentimes listen to learn or listen to understand. And so we have to shift out of that fix it mindset or win at all costs mindset or even just win mindset into curiosity. I think about it as humble curiosity. So starting conversations with, wow, I didn't realize that. Tell me more about that. Walk me through your day, help me understand, where you're struggling or where you're stuck or what's been really good about what your week has been like. Asking those types of questions signals that I'm here to learn, I'm here to understand, and I'm not just like, okay, you got 10 seconds to explain the issue to me before I run into this meeting, and then I'm gonna, try and offer you a quick fix, and boom, we're gonna, sort of like left in the psychological dust a little bit in those moments.
Yeah. I certainly see that, and I see that with senior leaders who are dealing with a very thorny problem, and they take it to their boss, who has zero patience for thorny problems in the first place, just wants it to go away. They want it done in 3, seconds. And so they have no patience to hear what is really taking to solve a particular problem. So yeah, demotivating, absolutely demotivating. I love that. Stop listening to fix as much. Stop listening to win as much. What's the angle that's kind of, I can spirit in there. Yeah, right. Yeah. Listen to understand and listen to learn. Okay, cool. All right. What other practices do you have to help build these resilient teams?
So we may not even think about this as a method to build resilient teams, but is so powerful and so strong, making sure people have clear roles and responsibilities. So what am I actually doing when I come into my work? What, in the context of this particular project or initiative, what is my role and what are my responsibilities? How do I communicate with other people on the team? How do we together as a team, how have we decided we're going to communicate with each other, especially if we're distributed and we're, over multiple time zones? What does that look like? So just being again, it all comes back to a lot of intentionality and clarity. As a leader, being very, very specific with people about their role and their function and the significance and the impact becomes really, really important. That notion of psychological safety, that sense of trust, that sense of team cohesion, that sense of when things do go wrong, how do we talk about it? Do we talk about it? Because I work with a lot of industries where precision and failure is not so much an option, right? And when things go wrong, because things are just so complex and moving quickly in our world of work, do we distinguish between the different types of failure? How do we talk about that? Is failure a bad thing, such that I know that if something goes wrong, my inclination is to hide what happened, which is no good for anybody, right? So we have to be thinking about that. And one of my favorite concepts is something called team efficacy. We talk about the research talks about self-efficacy also, but the process is the same in that when we encounter a challenge together or individually, I want your going in position, a resilient team's going in position in those moments is we got this. right? I think I can, sort of back to that children's book, the little engine that could, right? Who always said, I think I can. Resilient teams approach obstacles and problems and setbacks and uncertainties with that I think we can mindset, either because they've worked together. The culture is such that, you've got that glue and that sticky recognition and mattering built. You've got cohesion and trust such that we know that we can address these things. We may not see how it's all going to unfold, but we know that we'll figure it out along the way. And so, it's important for teams to develop that as well. So
Right.
those are some of the bigger pieces.
I love that. All right, let me just see if I can do a halfway decent review of all the things that have come through here, because there's a lot of it. One is this notion of sticky recognition and mattering, so that I am noticing something about each person who works on the team with me that is not about their output. And I am acknowledging it, recognizing it, being constructive about it, as in, how was the softball game on the weekend, or whatever else was going on. All right. 2 is getting the ABC needs right, which is autonomy. Forgot
Belonging.
belonging. How can I get that? Autonomy, belonging, and help me out here, Paula.
The challenge. Yep.
Challenge. Jeez. Wow. Autonomy, belonging, and challenge. Jeez. Yeah. Okay. All right. Then it is recognizing these very small wins, the teeny little progress along the way, the thing that is interesting about the day, and doing that consistently, regularly, like weekly, with the team as a team, not just with each of the individuals. So that certainly is helpful. 2 is to build the community of that team. That sense of belonging is have a meal together without an agenda item. Like there's not a business reason. It's just a gathering of us. And you can do that individually as well, check-ins with people, but you can also do that as a team is really important. And then it's making sure that we're not just focusing on the problems, that we're actually listening to understand or listening to learn. So it's not just about solving it and fixing it. It's catching the wins, catching the moments where those little things kind of pop through. Then clear roles and responsibilities, so we know where everybody is headed. And then psychological safety, so we can talk about things that went wrong, having a way to know that we are going to talk about it, a process, a time, a moment. And then building over time the sense that the team believes we got this, we think we can do it.
Yes. Very good.
All right. Except for missing ABC, because I forgot. I got distracted by ABC.
No, and that's okay. And there's one piece I want to just mention about the autonomy piece of the ABC, because we've touched on, I think, a couple of different practices, even through the lens of building resilient teams. We've talked a little bit about practices that build or fortify some of the B and some of the C. But I think that the autonomy piece stumps a lot of leaders, and they think like, well, how do I give people control? Their job is what it is, and where they work and when they work is not up to me, and that's company policy. And so what can I do? And so part of what I wanted to do in the book is expand that conversation. So just one really easy strategy that leaders can deploy to help build or the perception even of autonomy with their teams is to give them the explanation or the rationale or the backstory for why are we doing this? Why are we going from policy A to policy B? What's the point behind the change? How did we get this client? What is our little sphere in this larger perhaps initiative that we're working on? And being very clear with people about that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that I'll like why we're shifting directions, but you're giving me enough psychological maneuverability and latitude that I can figure out for myself, all right, how do I want to land in the context of what you just told me? So I call it showing your mental work. So if you do nothing other than develop that practice, you're going to be touching on that autonomy piece. So just remembering that too.
I think it's also true that if people understand more about the context, the daily little teeny tiny decisions they make, like how to send that email, how to write that email, which you can't micromanage, are going to be better because they're fitting in a larger context.
Well, and it's also a lot of fuel, right? I always give the example of my parents. So like, my parents, my dad started a business from scratch, and I talk about that in the book. And he basically took his side hustle back in the early 80s and turned it into a business, which started from nothing. And I think to myself, like, when I did some of my parents' legal work, and it was assigned to me by, folks in a law firm, if they had said, this guy built a business from scratch, and this is the example of, the American dream, and he's this fantastic entrepreneur, how that would have landed differently with me than, here, can you negotiate this lease on behalf of, ABC company, right? So understanding that like deeper story makes me go, yes, I want to be part of this, or advocate for this person, or do this work. And not everything is sexy and great or what have you, but I think we need just a little bit more of that story.
I think we need that as human to human connection, because when I understand somebody's story, I'm much more forgiving about their style and about their personality, or why they're being so adamant about this particular thing is only this particular way. I don't have any context for it. I just think they're a pain. But when I have context, I have a little more gratitude, a little more grace in dealing with them.
People's stories are very often a window into their values. People's stories are very often a window into why I think the world should operate the way that it should. And when I start to get into some of that deeper reasoning and the deeper layers, it helps exactly to your point, right? It helps me understand why I'm just perceiving them as being like persnickety or problematic, but it's like, ooh, no, now I get a little bit more of the reason why this is the way that it is.
Great.
So,
Great. It's fascinating. All right. I want to touch on one thing that is not necessarily part of your book, but I feel like I can't leave team resilience without doing this, because you talk about the roles and responsibilities, which I think is essential. What is it that I'm supposed to be doing, and what is it that my peer is supposed to be doing, and some clarity on that. But frequently the peer doing it is not in our team. The peer is in another team someplace else. And I see more go wrong on accountability, motivation, completion, and probably team resilience, because we can't control what that team over there does. And we can't control how their boss explained to them, and we can't control their context of why they're doing it. And now the pieces don't fit. So there's this conflict that may also be style differences, but it's also just conflict of, we see it differently. How does that play into this whole thing about team resilience, and any advice you have to offer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty complicated issue. And I think that, when I was learning about resilience, back at UPenn and learning the Penn Resilience Program and model, I mean, one of the big hallmarks of what we talked about is, focusing on what you can control. And I asked that question to almost every single team in the context of our burnout conversations, right? There's lots of macro issues that are playing in on our stress. What do you have the ability to control, motivate, or influence or leverage, right? And I think we have to do a better job at just understanding, like, what are those pieces, right? All right, so maybe I can have a conversation, peer to peer or leader to leader, or talk to my leader to say, hey, can you talk to the ABC team over here and mention that, things aren't working, and you need to have a conversation with that person's leader, like peer to peer, about what's happening. Are there communications or conversations that I can be having or being more explicit about with the people with whom I work? Are there little pieces that I haven't shored up in terms of like trust or other pieces like that? I mean, it's really about starting from the perspective of, and resilience is about starting from the perspective of, what can I control, influence, or leverage? And I have to really understand, when I don't have control, influence, or leverage, either I have to let it go, or I have to somehow modify or circumvent or do something else, because we're going to be wasting a lot of energy and spinning our wheels, not making any progress with anything. And so this is a really complicated issue, but it's the core of where I always start with folks and have them start to map that out and talk about what that looks like.
I like that one. I think we often write the script of the other person is somehow wrong or misguided or not motivated or some other version of that thing. And we stay stuck to our script. So we don't actually look at what are the pieces I can take action on, which give me a sense of agency or a sense of efficacy, and the team a sense of efficacy, and off we go. So,
yep. What am I in control? What can I do? What can I manifest? What can I influence? What can I leverage? What can I control?
I like that. What can I control? What can I influence? How can I motivate? And what can I leverage? I think that's a really good one. All right, Paula, what a fascinating discussion. 5 mindsets. The notion is building team resilience, which I think is fabulous. It's not just all down to the individual and the one individual and off we go. Team resilience. 5 mindsets. Prioritize sticky recognition and mattering. ABC needs first, which is autonomy, belonging, and challenge. Workload sustainability, which is about teaming practices and allows some time for recovery. Systemic resilience, which is the team. We've talked about a bunch of practices in both of those. And the last one is making sure people understand where the meaning is and the values are in the work that they're doing. And the book is called Leading Well: 5 Mindsets to Engage, Retain, and Inspire Your Team. Great advice, Paula. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, where can they reach you?
Yes. So my website is the hub of all things programmatic, book related, and my on-demand resources and all of that. That is stressandresilience.com.
Wonderful. All right. My guest today, Paula Davis, stressandresilience.com, and the book is Leading Well. Join us. Thank you for being here, and join us next week for another episode in Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone. Leave us a comment too on outofthecomfortzone.com. Send me an email. Love to hear from you at any given point, and join us next week.